Hi, Mama.
Hi, sweetie. It is good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Excited to get started. So, I will say, welcome to the Mother Daughter Download. This is a podcast where this mother daughter duo meets at the intersection of leadership and sociology. We are on opposite coasts and from different generations. I'm Lisa and mom. And for 20 plus years, I've guided leaders to navigate workplace disruption and build healthy cultures. Now I get to work as an executive coach and consultant, helping leaders cut through overwhelm so that they may achieve their next level of excellence with a little bit of ease.
Yeah, you're awesome. And I'm Alex. I'm a sociology professor at Howard University, American University, and Prince George Community College. I am daughter. And my work tends to center on identity, community, equity, because I feel that together we work better and can make more substantial change when we do work together as a community. So, here in this podcast, we're going to examine workplace dynamics through a very human-centered and impact-driven lens.
And I'm a proud mom. I had to just add that in. And we're here to explore how we can be more curious, courageous, and connected wherever we might work. And we will share our stories, insights, and tools to strengthen communication and inspire meaningful change that will apply both at work and in life.
Yeah, and our conversations will be grounded in lived experience, research, and our personal ongoing growth. We're not claiming universal truths by any means, just offering reflections and questions so that we can grow together. You'll find that we will put our references and resources in the description of our YouTube video. So if you want to continue to explore this subject matter beyond the podcast, you can go ahead and do that.
So, in episode one, just to reconnect where we started, we did explore the roots of professionalism, where it comes from, who defines it, and how it often reflects dominant cultural norms.
Yeah, so today we're asking based off of that, what happens when we do challenge these norms? Real inclusivity requires us to face discomfort in both corporate and academic spaces. We've been conditioned to equate professionalism with what feels familiar and what feels common and normal, right? But what happens when that familiarity and that comfortability actually ends up holding us back?
Yeah, and I do want to share just in our efforts to prepare for this conversation, and you are wonderful about challenging me, and I was really giving thought to, whew, I'm feeling my own discomfort, and I know what that is actually doing, again, pushing me to an edge to consider different views and so on. So in saying that, I want to certainly suggest to leaders ask for yourself as we're thinking about professionalism and different standards, is the standard necessary? Or is it just a tradition and something that you've been comfortable with? Is it the status quo? Is it what always existed? Or are we serving the needs of our people?
Which is the most important, right? So we aim to unpack the cost of conformity, the value of introspection, and how curiosity and compassion can really create a more equitable space wherever that is, as well as promoting authenticity in, again, whatever space that you're in.
So, whether you're a leader, an educator, or navigating change yourself as an individual, this episode will help you challenge assumptions and build environments where everyone can thrive.
Yeah, yay. I'm so excited. So, for me, again, today we're talking about the performance of professionalism, about embracing differences and creating a culture of curiosity. So, from a sociological perspective, professionalism, and my mom and I have had to kind of work on bridging the gap here, but professionalism from a sociological perspective often reflects the norms and values of people in power. So when someone challenges that norm, it can make us a bit uneasy. So we want to be very real about that and acknowledge that this is not something that is easy to do. So today, in terms of kind of our flow, we plan to cover, of course, some personal perspectives and experiences regarding professionalism, personal critiques, as well as getting into a few different biases that kind of play into professionalism as well. We also bring in some research that we find to be interesting regarding this. And we ultimately want to, suggest ways that we can use this information to take action for yourself. Again, whether that is going to impact your personal relationships or relationships within your organization. So then I have a question, Mom, since you're more so in corporate and I'm in academia, so we can have, we definitely have some overlap here, but definitely different spaces. So from your experience from 20 plus years in corporate, how would you define professionalism today?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been thinking about this, and I wish there was a quick, easy definition, but there's not. So,
Oh,
as I reflect on all the years being an HR leader and being closely involved in putting together policy and so on, is I would offer that professionalism and company standards are created both in a direct and indirect manner.
mm,
So directly, and this is clear, organizations might produce an employee handbook. They might have meeting standards, where we meet, how we keep minutes, and how you need to show up and be prepared. There might be operating principles. So again, outlining expectations. So that is a direct method of maybe sharing, a framework and expectation for the professionalism within an organization. But what I have found is there's also the indirect, unspoken standards, and those really impact the environment that you're aiming to create. And I just wanted to share, a couple of examples of what I've seen over the years and what I mean by indirect. And this is when and how a leader might model certain behaviors and expectations. And they do that by what they say, what
mm,
they do, how they show up, what behaviors they might encourage and reinforce, or even when they stay silent. So it's
mm.
also what you don't say that also might reinforce some standards of professionalism.
Yeah.
And to give you just like a couple of examples of like what I saw within the workplace is, for example, leaders might show up within the lunchroom or a meeting or an offsite and always choose the same chair or table to sit. And, so these are like norms and expectations, but they kind of send a message if you're always kind of gravitating to one set of folks, it really speaks to the sense of belonging and inclusivity within an organization. And those again, those unwritten standards. One other example I wanted to share was, in this has happened within the corporate environment. There's a meeting going on. And let's say there's a group of senior leaders in there, a group of 10, and a presenter comes in. And the presenter is getting started with what he or she is sharing. And there's a leader who actually interrupts and might say, and again, questions and delivery might be judgmental versus really, let's say, curious or trying to draw out. So if you end up, let's say, well, what do you mean by that? Or where did that come from? So just the delivery and tone of those questions can really impact, the sense of professionalism or belonging or feeling like you're in a culture that you can thrive in. And there's also, I think that uncovers, and you were mentioning this earlier when I shared that example, is it might also tee up a double standard of saying, I want professionalism, but what exactly is my behavior, let's say, in action? And again, so I just wanted to highlight that I think the way we end up defining professionalism both is certainly directly and in writing, but more so and more powerfully in those indirect manners of how leaders are showing up and conducting themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is very interesting, kind of going off of your example, is that once you are in a place of high power and high prestige, professionalism almost doesn't apply to you anymore. It does, but not to the same, or definitely not to an equivalent standard of what the CEO might expect from his employees in terms of professionalism. Once you have that power, you can go and interrupt your employees during their presentation because you're the boss, right? So it is interesting, and I agree with you in terms of kind of the indirect aspect of professionalism that uh, set an example, be the leader, be what you're asking them to be, and try to avoid that double standard if possible, because then why, as an employee, I might be like, well, why am I doing this if you're not doing this? So that can definitely be challenging. And like you said, there's somewhat of a double standard here, depending on what position you are in the hierarchy at your workplace, wherever that is. But then I'm curious, going beyond your kind of corporate experience with your experience in coaching more recently, have you seen any of these expectations shift over time or not? Like, is there anything positive that we've seen in terms of shifts in our expectations of professionalism?
Yeah. Well, I definitely think that due to the pandemic, that there is a shift, I believe, of more flexibility, maybe a little bit more appreciating that people are coming from different places and operating in different ways. And I also think that flexibility with how we show up can also be a value add to the employee work experience. And I know that we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So I do indeed feel that there have been some shifts in terms of this sense of openness, flexibility, and also employee well-being, which is, I think, a real indicator of a pretty awesome culture. That's what employees are looking for. But I'll also say, I'm thinking about, again, very seasoned, talented, high achieving leaders that I work with, recently, they still struggle with this idea of, am I enough? Or the imposter syndrome, or, can I really show up as me? And all of that, again, it's triggered by what's the tone of the culture of the organization? Is it buttoned up? Is it relaxed and casual? Is it a jeans environment? All of that is set and the tone is set. But I'll just share this one example of a real nuance of a woman who was wildly talented, incredibly successful, and loved the color pink, but was told to think about her executive presence in terms of choice of colors that she would use and wear within the workplace. So yes, we've made some progress. We still have work to do. And I know that we're going to talk a little bit more about how leaders and ourselves as individuals, how we can kind of check ourselves on the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something interesting, even with you and I being in different generations, is that when you are in a workplace, there's people of all different generations, right? From old to young, whatever. And the problem is, the aspect of socialization, which is the process of learning norms, values, traditions within our society and how to kind of play into those largely. When you don't play into those, we kind of call that deviance in sociology, right? And deviance isn't necessarily positive or negative, can be neutral, even not necessarily just a bad thing, which we kind of think of colloquially. But when we kind of go outside of how we were socialized in terms of what is normal and what do we value and how do we behave in certain settings, we can be considered deviant. And that makes people uncomfortable, right? And certain sanctions come along with that, whether that's positive or negative. We can have a positive sanction, which is reinforcing somebody's deviant act or thought process, or we can have negative sanctions, which are things that we do, whether that's conscious or unconscious, about kind of discouraging people from committing or playing into certain deviant acts, right? So, for example, if someone comes up with a really cool idea that's out of the box, that might be positive deviance. And there might be positive sanctions in terms of, oh, wow, that's a great idea. Like, let's do that. Or, on the other hand, it could be something, as we were talking about, something that is very much not normal in the workplace, whether that is, we had some examples, but whatever, whether it's like sending an email in a very casual way or wearing something that maybe is more adept for a vacation rather than the workplace, right? You might get written up or have a talking to. So we
Mhm.
see that, deviance going outside of the norm can be positive or negative, and the way that people respond to that and induce different sanctions can also depend on the person and their perspective. But kind of going back to intergenerational, the way that we were raised and what we find to be professional depends on when we were born and who we were raised by, where we were raised, and from what perspective do our parents have, because that is family is first and foremost the most important or the most impactful facet when it comes to socialization. So
Mm.
whatever, we just see that what is normal for us is largely based on how we were raised and by who.
Yeah.
And of
And I want to just jump in. I know you have more to say here, but I just wanted to play with the word deviant and sanctions and just connect it to some corporate language for the leaders who are listening there, which it just, deviance, I'm thinking about it outside of the norm,
yes,
right? And then the leaders have the power and ability to actually call that out and draw it in. And then sanctions within the workplace, I'm thinking about, those are like reward systems or
yes.
the stories that we tell or, who are we inviting to the table? So, and I think that anyway, I just wanted to kind of play on those words, which are important. And I've, again, had longer conversations with you on them, but connecting them to within work and then what can leaders do with that? Because I think there's an amazing opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it just becomes difficult because our biases come from multiple places, but again, first of all, how we were raised and what environment, but also very much by the values and norms of the dominant culture, which is again the demographics of people who hold power and prestige in our society. And we do see that our implicit biases tend to align with dominant cultural norms about race, gender, class, neurodivergence, ability, disability, all of these things tend to be in some sort of a hierarchy of when it comes to privilege and power, right? So we have to kind of deal with what our background is. But as I would just think as leaders, we need to understand that people do come from different demographic backgrounds, whether that's location, that could be urban, rural, suburban, right? All of these things really impact the way that we think and perceive professionalism. And so I think the goal is just to make sure that we're not being limited in that, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then just a few, again, implicit bias, just recap real quick. Implicit means kind of, you can think of that as like internal or subconscious, whereas
Mhm.
explicit bias is, as it sounds, something more explicit and outwardly. So, you can say something sexist about women, and that would be explicit bias. But we also have implicit biases, which are, again, biases or opinions or thoughts that we have that we might not even be aware of. And these are things that we absorb from our society, going back to dominant culture. Like, what things do we privilege? What things do we like? What things are professional and not professional? We absorb these through, again, family, media, school, teachers, friends, whatever. But then there's a few more specific biases that I wanted to talk about within implicit biases, which again, subconscious. This is usually not something that you are doing purposefully, but rather something that you were socialized to believe. So a few biases I wanted to talk about was in-group bias, right? And in-group bias is the opposite of out-group bias. So in-group bias is quite literally just preferring people who are similar to us. We typically do this, again, subconsciously without even really talking to someone, where we might just look at someone, whether that's what they're wearing or how they're speaking or how they carry themselves, or again, different demographic backgrounds, where we again prefer or gravitate towards people that are similar to us. So this might look like in a workplace promoting or even mentoring people who feel familiar to us because they remind us of ourselves. Mom, have you maybe seen that at all or
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, and I'm thinking about some of the training that I've done with leadership teams to share this concept directly, right? That we naturally have these implicit biases. And as you were talking, I was just thinking about how challenging it is to say, is a leader ready to embrace this idea? And I'm just thinking about if we it's all about the outcome. Like what do you want? Do you want a more inclusive workplace? Do you want to attract top talent? Do you want the best of the best? Do you want innovation? And that includes, again, diversity of thought, and all these other demographics that you're talking about right now.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple other biases I just wanted to bring up that I think are interesting is confirmation bias, which we don't it's not typically applied to people, but I still think it's important in terms of confirmation bias is that we seek out information that aligns with what we already believe. And I do think that that can apply to people a little bit as well in terms of preferring people who have opinions or approaches that align with yours. And whether that is, again, promoting or preferring or whatever, as an employee who, again, is going to do things the way that you want to do them
Yeah.
tend to be, privileged or have better outcomes or opportunities maybe. And then another one that is kind of interesting to me, just in, a little bit one off, but when I was reading up on and getting prepared for this podcast, something that I saw a lot was attractiveness bias, which is
Mm,
quite literally preferring people who are attractive. And this has been established in evolutionary psychology. Like we naturally, and this has been also if you go into like social psychology research, we prefer people who are or tend to be more conventionally attractive, right? And so when we applied this to the workplace, there's also a very robust body of research that really delves into the fact that we even associate beauty with competence. And this
mm.
goes into voice, the way that we dress, again, different demographic backgrounds, and again, of course, just conventional beauty standards, which shift over time, right? That's a social construct. What is beautiful is very much changing, but we do associate attractiveness with competence and whatever that can really go into hiring practices, promotions, performance evaluations, and whatever. Yeah, so I just think that's interesting. And Mom, do you feel like maybe do you think that's valid, or do you think you haven't seen that? Have you seen that? It's kind of a
No,
difficult one.
absolutely. And as you were sharing that is I'm just thinking about the importance of the systems that are created within a work environment or academia, Alex, because I'm thinking about your rubrics that are incredibly important that set the expectations up front in terms of what will be measured. What does success look like? What are the categories of it? Again, there's, competency grids that are used within organizations. And then,
Objectivity, right? Like objectivity over subjectivity, and really
yeah,
making sure that there are those rubrics for. And does that happen in corporate? Like, are there objective, almost like rubrics or measures where it's like, oh, we're gonna hire someone who does this well this many times, or is part of it just a personal preference of the hiring manager or the
yeah.
boss?
No, it's a great question. And of course, so this is what I'll say. We of course aspire for objectivity. And then the tools for objectivity are the job description. What is the exact work? What are the knowledge, skills, attributes required to be successful in that role? And again, what are the core competencies? And then of course you want to interview for that. But then, these things that you were just mentioning, the different biases, they play in and we could ultimately have two almost like very similar candidates. But to your point, I think a manager might indeed lean on. I am certain I have done this too in my career. And I end up, and it's interesting, and I'll share this one example. I remember hiring someone I had an open position within HR, and I ended up selecting someone, and I'll say this, who had a similar personality to me. I was looking for the energy and how she, talked and how she might engage with candidates. That's what I was looking for, similar to me. However, I'll tell you, there was another very solid candidate who probably would have done incredibly well. Maybe she would have stayed longer, who had a different way of showing up. So
Yeah,
that's
and
me
I think,
challenging my own.
yeah, no, that's a great example, and I'll just real quick before I know you have some other points you want to make, but I want to be clear with implicit biases, again, subconscious. It's not that people just hire pretty people, but it
Mm,
might be a situation like that where you have two equally outstanding candidates, but maybe the way that they are presenting themselves or the way that they speak or have certain soft skills, right? We're not looking at the hard skills anymore, more objective. But again, having two very similar candidates but someone might be, more attractive, which might associate with competence or being put together or being prepared, or even the way that we speak and communicate, right, might come off as being more prepared, and that might just give you a one up. Again, no one's hiring people because they're pretty, but it's something that kind of plays in subconsciously. So that's
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I feel like I have so much more to say in that area, but we'll have to table
Yeah.
it for another talk because I know we
Yeah.
have a lot of other great conversation. Did you want to talk a little bit about, I know you created a really cool worksheet opportunity that you're going to share.
Oh yeah, and I totally, yeah, was gonna plug that later on, but kind of based off of the biases that I just mentioned in terms of implicit bias, in-group bias, confirmation bias, attractiveness bias. I did create a reflection workbook worksheet type thing, that I will add for free. I'll add the link in the PDF for free in the description, that can just help you kind of reflect on these biases and how these biases might appear in your life, and kind of being able to reflect on how we might mitigate those things. But again, I do think when it comes to bias, what I teach my students is that the first step to approaching your biases is acknowledging them, reflecting on them. So again, just created a worksheet that I will share with you all, where you can go in and reflect on your biases, which really, again, is just the first step, being curious and being willing to be introspective. So that will be attached in our description as well.
Great. And as you were sharing, and I know that that's just a few biases that exist.
Yeah,
Um,
very few.
Yeah, and when I was doing some research as well, preparing for this conversation, I came across the work from a Dr. Matthew Lieberman, and he's a neuroscientist and he's a professor at UCLA, and it has some really great content. And I love and really appreciate from a neuroscience perspective how incredibly important that is for leaders, how we lead, aiming to understand that. And just briefly thinking about biases. I also think biases, there's some advantages to that, but wanting to define it, they're mental shortcuts, right? That affect our behavior and decision making. And
We couldn't survive without it.
exactly. Right. And
Yeah.
I know that you were saying this to me earlier, which is like, doesn't make us bad, right? And
No.
and you already said it, it's like it's about the awareness, but when do the biases, there's those shortcuts are advantageous when we are doing routine things in our life, brushing our teeth, driving our car, these basic things we quickly respond to. But then I wanted to highlight a couple of things in regards to these categories of um, different domains of bias that exist at work and kind of like how they show up. And you've already begun to, tag some of them through the sociological lens. So one of them, again, you already talked about similarity, and I just want to share how I've seen this show up within work is managers have a tendency, as you just talked, go to and seek out candidates or people or teams that are familiar or safe. So we do indeed gravitate to the people who look, sound, and think like this. And I just gave an example of that. And I've seen this play out, and this is one of many examples where the senior leadership team, they would ensure that the internship program recruited from their alma mater. Well, if we go there, we are going to bring in additional candidates that look like, again, the dominant senior leadership team that already exists. So that's where needing to be very intentional about how do we, let's say, recruit and source, and that we can't go to the places that just are always familiar and safe and comfortable. So I challenge leaders to think about that. Another category of bias is expedience. And this is really important, just because within the workplace today, it is about speed. It is about efficiency. It's, getting more done with less. But if we keep on going with the quick answers over the thoughtful ones, we might be missing opportunities. So just want to encourage, Nick, you can't do this with all decisions, but when can you slow down, pause, and reflect and say, did we consider all angles here?
Yeah.
Um, And with experience as well, experience is another category where we can lean on my personal perspective. I kind of lean on it as objective truth, and we need to challenge ourselves. We might mistake our worldview for the truth, and need to ask the question, is there another angle? Is there another possibility? And who am I consulting with and checking my bias with? And I think this is incredibly important just as individuals and as leaders. Who are you surrounding yourself with? And are your advisors, your life advisors, your work advisors, are they diverse? Um, and there's a couple of others, but you know what? I'm going to, for the sake of time, make sure that I pass this back to you, because we'll have this material added in to our summary.
Absolutely. I do want to say though, looking at our notes, the main five domains by Dr. Lieberman, you said,
Mhm. Yeah.
similarity, expedience, experience, distance, and safety. The
Mhm.
acronym is SEEDS, and I like that. So planting
Ah.
seeds for us to grow. I don't know if he maybe said that in his paper, but again, similarity, expedience, experience, distance, and safety. It's
And
like
I
planting
and I
seeds too.
I love that you saw it and you didn't read the article, and
I
he
did
does
it.
it. And he does.
Okay.
He does. He
Sorry,
does.
Mom. I'm like, my mom told me about it. That's all I needed to know.
No,
I'm
it's
like, I
good.
trusted
It's
you.
good. No, it's
But no,
all
that's a
good.
cute little acronym. But we can
Yeah.
post that paper in
Yeah.
the description as well, so you can look more into that acronym of SEEDS. But
Perfect.
no, I just wanted to back up that research with that of my own in terms of psychology and sociology. I also have a psychology degree, so I'm very interested in both sides, whether it's individual or via groups. But so there's, I'm about to quote some older research papers just to establish that this has been established for the longest time. Um, I don't want to butcher last names. Again, I'll post these in the description in terms of resources, but there was a paper by Kurzban et al. In 2001 where he talks about, or they talk about, how humans are naturally attuned to coalitional alliances, kind of a big word here. But again, just alliances with those who are similar to us. And we end up using these visual clues, like similarity in terms of appearance, clothing, speech, to assess group membership. Where do I belong? Where do they belong? And do they belong with me? And then we have another one by Tajfel and Turner. This is 1979, about social identity theory. And that essentially says that humans categorize themselves into groups and actually derive self-esteem from their group identity, which is important, right? Like we have pride in our identities. And so again, when we see somebody else with a similar identity, we have this tie to our pride about, oh my gosh, I'm this, you're this, wow, yay, right? Like it's very much a positive thing. It's a good thing. It's a functional thing. It's just that when we leave certain people out, that it becomes negative. And then one more paper, oh my gosh, I don't even want to try, but Park et al. 2009. This paper was about the tribal instinct hypothesis, evolution and the social psychology of intergroup relations, right? And this one largely argues that our tendency to favor in groups, people who share identities or even preferences or interests as us, right? Mom, like if I'm walking down the street and I see someone, I live in DC, and I see someone with a Celtics jersey on, I'm like, okay,
Right?
Celtics, okay. And so it doesn't have to be something
Absolutely.
like so intense. It can be something as similar as you're out traveling and you see someone with a Red Sox hat
Hmm.
on, or a Lakers jersey on, and you're like, okay, we have something in common here. We have a identity or a preference or an interest in common here, right? So whatever, this paper in 2009 again just argues that our tendency to favor in groups and therefore distrust
Yeah.
out groups is rooted in evolutionary adaptations for group living. So, again, my point here with this research is that this is something very natural that we do, and that in the beginning, and still a bit today, is tied to our survival. But again, we do live in a more modern time now where we don't need to necessarily depend on all of these biases. We're kind of at a point where we are more, I think, cognitively advanced, where we can really reflect on why we think about these certain things and how this possibly innate biological thought process might positively or negatively impact our relations in the workplace.
Yeah. And I love that rundown. And I'm thinking about what does this mean within the workplace? And again, for leaders and as individuals, is understanding this, again, the data and the research that you just shared, and then say, okay, what does that mean for me operating successfully within the workplace? And again, particularly as a leader, which is you're there to elevate other people. How are you getting the best out of others? And I'm going to kind of throw curiosity to the top of it and being interested, right, in those differences, because that's the reality. The workplace is a very it needs to be diverse group of folks, and we know and have so much data in regards to, yep, diversity needs to be a business imperative, but we do know the advantages of when women, people of color are on boards, are on senior leadership teams. It impacts revenue and net profit, and again, customer relations, and all in a number of metrics.
Yeah.
So again, I love the baseline, but then also kind of saying, okay, now what do leaders need to do within the workplace? Challenge this again, that innate and evolutionary adaptations that have been made, but then say, all right, what do I need to do to succeed in the environment today?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, with that, we're going to kind of go into our reflections, action steps, major takeaways. So, for me personally, in terms of reflection, we'll keep it simple, is, again, challenging our assumptions and what has just been a given for us in our everyday life is hard. It's difficult. It's not easy. It's something we're questioning what we're used to and what we find to be the right way to do things, right? So I just want to put that out there that this is difficult, but I know that you can do it. And again, curiosity is the first step. If you're here, you're already curious. So I want to commend you for taking that first step to learn a little bit more about something that might benefit you or others. So with me, my reflection questions are just reflecting on what standards in terms of professionalism, but as a sociologist, I want to push you even beyond that. Whatever, what are some expectations or understandings? But again, in the context of this, what are some professional standards that you were raised with? And write that down, right? And then I want you to go back to that list and think about, do these standards still serve you and others? And to what degree? Is it how important are these expectations? Are there some that you're willing to give a little give on? Are there some that you're like, I absolutely need this? Are there some that you're like, maybe this one isn't that important, right? And so again, I want to just plug my worksheet again that will attach to again just kind of encourage further reflection about certain biases and standards that we're used to and whether we are willing to make any changes there.
Yeah. Yeah. Good thoughts. And you've had me reflecting a lot too. And as I think about, what might be some really good and healthy takeaways here from the conversation and wanting to move towards, and I believe individuals and leaders together want to cultivate, cultures that are healthy and thriving and enjoyable. So I would like to suggest just some small shifts in how you go about formulating and cultivating your workplace culture, policy, and leadership that can drive long-term impact. So first of all, it starts with awareness. And Alex, you've been saying that. So that is a powerful step. We have ownership on that and to continue with intentional action. So here are a couple of things we all can own. Slow down with decisions, particularly leaders. Slow down so that we're challenging and getting in front of that expedient thinking, which is a natural bias. Diversify your inner circle. Ensure that you're getting advice and feedback from a diverse set of advisors, people who look, talk, speak, came from different places than you. Set inclusive standards and do that along with your employees, not in isolation because you know best, because you're a senior leader. Employees have amazing ideas. in regards to creating a culture that is, again, valuable to everyone. And then model vulnerability. We don't have all the answers. We as leaders, even if we're senior folks, we're making mistakes. We can reset thinking. Again, Alex, you do this every time I talk with you, and I'm like, oh man, that's interesting and good stuff. And then I go, why am I uncomfortable because she's challenging my status quo. So it happens. And then also for HR leaders and again, senior leaders who are creating systems, be really thoughtful and reflective about those systems, everything from how you're hiring and onboarding and promoting and who you're inviting to the table. The systems actually have significant impact on the employee experience.
Yeah, yeah, and just real quick, I think the most important part, the starting point and innate with the things that you just said is that be willing to reflect, be willing to be curious, stay open-minded. Inclusivity isn't a checkbox, it's a culture for your business. And every leader really has a lot of power and impact about being able to help shape that culture.
Yeah, it's so true. And then just a couple of other things I'll offer in regards to some clear steps for leaders to take is think about the standards that you have in place. Again, thinking about professionalism and align those standards with your mission and industry purpose. Be clear with the why they exist. And I want to connect it back, Alex, to what you had said. Episode 1 was about professionalism being crafted around intent, impact, and integrity. So I love that. I think it's a great framework. Clarify your culture. Really ask, what do you want the employee experience to be? And then check in with your people. So when you're creating, lastly, the standards and norms, do that with getting input from people. It's not a one and done. Test it, survey, and adjust.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think the taking input, test it, survey, adjust, I think that's just super important in terms of understanding that we're not going to get it right on the first try. We're
Yeah.
not. We can't, and we all have good intentions and we want to hope that our first idea is the best idea and that it works out. That's convenient. But realistically, it won't. And people are so diverse that also not everything's going to work for everybody. But it's about finding what works for the culture of your business that uplifts your employees and makes you feel good about what you're doing and makes everyone feel good about the goal that we're collectively working on. So again, your first try isn't going to work. We have to try, retest, get feedback. And the more
Mhm.
that we do that, the closer we can get to an inclusive, I think, workspace. And again, I'm in academia, but I would say the same thing about academia. So but in terms of segueing into just our kind of like final major takeaways, I would just say, I like to keep it simple, but social norms around professionalism, they're not neutral. They're socialized. It's things that we learn, and we need to really understand that people grow up in different ways and different time periods with different people with different influences, and we're not all going to have the same understanding. Be willing to teach each other, be willing to help each other out rather than being like, oh, they're doing that weird, like, good, how, like, I think that small individual actions can really make an impact. So if there's somebody, whatever, do your best to help people. And for example, what I mean is I have students who will email me and it will be so casual it's almost like a text message instead of me thinking, oh my god, these people are just so unprofessional and why don't they know how to write an email. I can kind of assume they weren't taught that, and what can I do about that? I can teach them how to write an email so that going forward they aren't in this kind of conundrum where they might be perceived as unprofessional. So if there's something that you can do to help somebody out, some sort of tips or pointers, I think we should do that. Another thing is that bias can be mitigated with, first of all, awareness, and second of all, intentional effort. What I tell all my students is, and I would recommend doing the IAT, the implicit association test by Harvard. You can go into Google, just do IAT Harvard, and it will come up. You can test a bunch of different implicit biases. What I tell them is that we have these implicit biases. It's going to be really hard to change those. But if we're aware of, oh, I have a bias against this group, or I have a bias preferencing this group, we can then make actions that go against that. So even me as a teacher, I have biases, and maybe the IIT says, oh, I have biases against women, because realistically, even women have biases against women. People of color have biases against people of color. Because again, we're listening and we're absorbing the dominant ideology of our society. So we tend to hold these biases, again, whether we want to or not. But so let's say the IoT says I have some biases against women. I can be aware of that and then take steps to make sure that in my actual day to day at work, I call on more women students. I make sure that they have equal opportunity. I make sure that I'm going out of my way to make sure that that they can, whatever, that I'm mitigating the biases that I might have. My last thing, wrapping that all up, would just be that small individual actions rooted in reflection and with the goal of curiosity and change and improvement will actually create a change. And don't think that just one person that you can't actually, no, we all have power, and we have power when we come together even more so. So you can be that first person to make that step and make that change, and you're going to inspire other people, and you don't know how big of a change that could create in your organization.
Great takeaways. I'll just offer a couple of quick thoughts thinking about the workplace and what leaders can think about is where ultimately want to create cultures of curiosity. And if you focus in on that and replace certainty with curiosity, you'll watch creativity and your business metrics will flourish. Rigid standards, I think, again, professionalism and otherwise, get in the way of attracting top talent. If the standards are too rigid or exclusionary, organizations are going to lose out. So being mindful of that, because employees today are super smart and discerning, and they have expectations about the environment and culture they're willing to invest in, their time and talent. So be mindful of that. And then the last question I'll leave with you as you're thinking now and hopefully reflecting on the standards that you've created within your organization. Are you creating standards again with a purpose and with value to your employee population, or just enforcing sameness?
Yeah,
And I'll there.
absolutely. Absolutely, Mom. I think you came up with some really impactful suggestions. And so with that, I want to say thank you for tuning in. I hope that this was informative and that you can take advantage of our reflection worksheet that I mentioned to hopefully improve relations, whether that is, again, in your personal life or in business or in school. And as always, you can reach us via the comments and via our email, which is the motherdaughterdownload@gmail.com. I want to just say that we fully encourage you to leave questions, comments, experiences in the comment section or to email us, because our third podcast in this series will be us directly responding to your questions and comments. So please don't hesitate. We're looking forward to your thoughts and questions, and we look forward to addressing those in our next podcast. So with that, thank you for tuning into the Mother Daughter Download, and we look forward to seeing you next week.